Hello everyone, my name is Katharina Huseljić. I'm a PhD student at the University of Düsseldorf, and I'm today presenting a paper with my colleague Marco Wähner.
Hello everyone, my name is Marco Wähner and I'm a PhD student from the University of Düsseldorf as well.
And our paper that we present is about classes and motivations for participation. We look at the local level to look at participation, and there we look at online participation because the internet gives the possibility to use new forms of participatory governance, and municipalities especially work with them when they plan transitions towards a more sustainable mobility infrastructure. We came here from the thought that participation in democracy has the potential of reducing the current power dynamics, but when we look at participation procedures in real life, they are often framed by these power structures. Research here has a strong focus on statistical categories of gender, education, and age, and from this point, we want to take a closer look at other categories that might define the volume of resources someone has, and I will come to this a bit later. First, I will talk about our research questions, and here we have 3 questions that we ask. We ask whether resource groups differ in the prevalence of their incentives for participation. We ask whether resource groups differ in their likelihood for participation, and we ask in which way different incentives increase the likelihood for participation for differing resource groups. We therefore take a theoretical approach that was kind of invented by Bourdieu, who talked a lot about persons' positions in the social space and the power a person has according to his or her position in the social space. And he therefore looks a lot at capital volume and divides capital into 3 forms he considers important for a person's position in this social space, and these forms of capital are economic capital as money, cultural capital in an incorporated, materialized or institutionalized form, and social capital. And these forms of capital are assumed not only to influence a person's position in the social space, but also to influence a person's behavior, ways of thinking, and maybe perception of benefits. And that's how we come to our topic of motives or incentives, which Marco will present.
The decision to participate occurs in response to several incentives. However, we do not explain participation by a narrowly economic analysis. Instead, we use a broader or wider assumption of different incentives based on the work of Clark and Wilson. First of all, purposive incentives are closely connected to the stated goal of a participation procedure, but only the stated goal is as an incentive minus goal, because everyone, and it doesn't matter if they participated or not, profits from a collective good. But what we know, for example, from research about political protest, is that the perceived discontent of public good might drive people to action, and especially if they feel if they have a sense of political influence. The second incentive is the solidarity incentives, what is close related to a sense of citizens' duty or also the affiliation to a city. As the last incentives, we have material incentives, which are in the original sense like tangible benefits, but here we have a more broader incentives, which might be also intangible. But the important thing, they are private benefits, and you only get these benefits if you participate. All in all, we formulated assumptions. First of all, we expect that purposive, solidarity, and material incentives all influence participation positively, but also we expect differences between the resource groups.
We use data that was collected between May and July 2018 in 3 German municipalities, including, on one hand, a random sample from the municipality's population and participants of 3 similarly organized participation procedures. And we observed the participation procedure that was called the bicycle dialogue, which was a map-based online participation procedure that was dealing with the cycling infrastructure. We operationalized our variables participation coded as yes, no, yes if someone participated in these dialogues, no if they didn't. The resource groups were coded as high capital, high economic capital, high education, and low capital. And we did this by grouping the individuals by their economic capital, for which we took the household income, split it at a median category into a high and a low capital group, and their institutionalized cultural capital, meaning their education, which was 1 for the people who were higher or had Abitur, and 0 for people who were lower than Abitur, and that gave us these 4 resource groups. The incentives were coded with high values indicating a high incentive for participation, and as control variables we used political efficacy, political interest, social capital, and gender. Here you can shortly take a look at our descriptives. 386 people participated in the procedure, and you can see already for our resource groups that they were a bit, the distribution was a bit weird. We had a lot of people with high capital on both categories, and people in the other categories, there were not so many, but this shouldn't be a problem for our to test whether we can measure our incentives in the way we imagined. We used structural equation modeling and estimated our incentives as latent variables. And since we had 4 groups, which can by theory be assumed to have maybe different understanding of the questions, we also performed multi-group analysis on this model, and we found equal understanding of the questions and possibilities of equally building our indices for the measurement model.
From our measurement model, we use the factor scores to compute indices for each incentive. And now we want to answer our first research question: if the resource groups differ in the prevalence of incentives for participation. And as expected, we have mean differences, for example, for the material incentives, as lowest means we found lowest means for low capital and high economic capital groups compared to the other groups. Second, we ask if resource groups differ in the likelihood for participation, and for that reason we use the indices, or the weighted indices, in a logistic regression. And what we found was that the low capital and high economic capital groups significantly participate less often in comparison to the high capital group.
In the last step, we performed logistic regression to find how the incentives influence the likelihood for participation, and we find positive influences for all three incentives we defined. We also tested interactions to see whether groups significantly differ in the increasing effect of the incentives, and thereby we find one significant difference, namely that the group with only high economic capital have a significantly weaker increase in the likelihood for participation than the reference group with high capital on all categories. We also plotted these results from the interaction effects, and here you can see the differences in the increase in the likelihood for participation for the different resource groups.
All in all, our findings suggest that incentives differ between resource groups, and also that resource groups differ in their likelihood for participation, but that incentives increase the likelihood for political participation. And especially we have an effect of purposive incentives, which significantly is weaker for high economic capital group in reference to a high capital group.
For the limitations, we can say that we work with data that was not representative for the whole society in Germany, only for 3 special cases. And we also used quite a special case study with the bicycle dialogues. We know that people with different resources also differ in their mobility behavior, which is why the bicycle dialogues may not have been the best or the perfect example. Also, we have the solidarity incentive measured as a single item factor, which is a problem. So in our further research, we will consider adding more questions measuring that. And we have no measurement provided of active or inactive participation in the procedure, but only a measurement of a 0-1 coded participation, yes or no, in the procedure. And the last problem is that our resource groups slightly differ in their size.